If you have somebody who can only fight with one side, yet you can utilize both, that's going to make you a more effective fighter. You're going to be one up on your opponent. If you're in one side and he's starting to kind of figure you out and he's got a game plan based on a southpaw fighter or an orthodox fighter, and you switch it up on him, oh my goodness, he's not going to know what to do with himself. Over the last couple months and here in the near future, I'm working on making the transition and getting back into competitive fighting, kickboxing, MMA. And I found out something really cool, something that I really didn't expect to happen. And that is, out of all the things that I've ever trained before in my life, Filipino Martial Arts, FMA, pekiti-tirsia, has had the most carryover, the most crossover when it comes to the training that I'm doing now. So how does fighting with a sword make me a better MMA fighter? One of the things that I've seen with competitive fighters, and one of the things that I want to avoid myself, is being a real two-dimensional fighter, meaning that when I'm here, I'm just going in and coming back out. When it comes to Filipino martial arts, there is a lot of angular type footwork, meaning that I'm going off at a left angle, or I'm going off at a right angle, or I'm going side to side, or I'm going reverse at those same left and right angles. Usually it's done at a 45. And the idea is when there's a weapon involved, I want to make sure that I'm not fighting my opponent straight on, because I become a really easy target. And so it would make sense that if I'm fighting somebody with a weapon and I'm trying to keep from getting hit and I'm trying to maneuver and I'm trying to make sure that I can strike off angle, it would make a lot of sense that I would do the same thing if it was empty hand. Instead of fighting straight on with this guy, I want to cut those angles. I want to go to the flank. I want to work my way around my opponent and be able to hit him, but simultaneously make myself a lot harder to hit. Now, if you're looking for a little bit more of in-depth of the footwork system, check this video out right here, because we really break it down for you and to where you can use it whether you're using a weapon or, again, in this type of reference, you're going empty hand. Another thing to think about when you're thinking about footwork is being able to maintain the range between you and your opponent. In order to be effective when it comes to fighting with a weapon, you have to be able to judge the range, meaning that how far in can I go before this stick is able to hit me, or how far do I need to go to my opponent before I can hit him with my stick. When you take the weapon away, the point of range is still there. And that means that if I'm wanting to break in on my opponent, I want to make sure that as I go in, I'm operating in the proper range to use whatever weapon that it is that I'm choosing, whether it's my punches, knees, kicks, elbows, whatever. When you're training with the weapon, you get really good at judging that range really quickly, because there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of fighting. When you're talking about Filipino martial arts, that carries over directly, because one of the things that I was told a long time ago, and I believe 100% to be true, is that if you can keep from getting hit by a stick, there's not a single punch, there's not a single kick that you have to worry about. Another crossover that I found is the proper application of body mechanics when it comes to striking. Now, Filipino martial arts striking is very specific. You're working off at an angle, you're working at thrusting, you're working at slashing, and we'll just use the angle 1 and 2 for this video. Is that when I'm doing my angle 1, I don't want to sit here and just strike with my arm. I want to make sure that I incorporate my entire body. So when I do this angle 1 strike, I'm going with a full follow through. My shoulder is turning, and from the hips and the upper body, the torso, everything is turning to maximize the range of motion and the amount of power that I'm getting in the strike. Same with the angle 2. When I'm doing this angle 2, my body is opening back up, and I'm going again with this full range of motion, and I'm making sure that I turn my body. And the way that this transfers into MMA is that when I'm striking, whether it's a kick or a punch, I want to make sure that I incorporate proper body mechanics. I want to use the entire kinetic chain of energy. That way, when I hit my opponent, he knows that he's been hit. I don't want to waste effort. I don't want to waste energy. And I want to make sure that every time I hit this guy, he feels like he got hit by Mike Tyson. The only way that you're able to do this is with proper mechanics. So when I go to throw my punch, I don't want to just throw my punches with my arms. I want to turn my body. I want to turn my body. I want to turn my body. I'm utilizing my body's mechanics, again, with that kinetic chain of energy driving from the ground to make sure that everything that I throw is thrown with full intent. So building off the mechanics is going to take us directly into precision and control. Now, when you're training Filipino martial arts, one of the biggest things that you have to worry about is your opponent's weapon wielding hand, meaning the hand that they have the weapon, whether it's single or double. This is the biggest threat to you because obviously, I can touch you with this weapon, and it's this hand that controls it. You can hit me in the stomach, you could hit me in the face, and it doesn't take the threat away of that weapon. So I need to pay attention to this. When you're being dynamic, when you're in the flow, when you're in the fight, you want to be able to target that weapon-wielding hand. If I hit that hand, then I have a chance of disarming my opponent, thusly being able to finish the fight. So as we're moving around, I'm aiming for that hand. I'm aiming for that hand. I'm trying to either slash or thrust, but I'm trying to take out what's posing the biggest threat to me. Taking that point and moving it into more of a competitive type fighting scenario, I'm training and I'm focusing in on the hand and I'm able to attack that hand to be able to close safely with my opponent and to be able to finish that fight. If I could hit something as small as a hand with a stick that's moving around and trying to hit me too, I could probably find a smaller hole in my opponent and be able to break through his guard or be able to land a shot that may open up another hole to which I can exploit and be able to finish this fight. So making the point of learning how to train these things, especially if you're by yourself, because let's face it, nowadays it's hard to find time and other people to get together and train and also be effective in that training. So if you're training solo and you're looking for something that's going to help with your precision, it's going to help with your control, I do have a couple ideas. One of which is get a tennis ball, just a cheap dollar store tennis ball, and tie a string to it and hang it from somewhere. And while that tennis ball is hanging there, move around a little bit and try to strike that tennis ball. Once you make contact with it, it's going to move a little bit, and instead of stopping it and then starting again, while it's moving, try to hit it from wherever it's at. This is going to build your precision 100 times. And it's going to transfer back into what you're trying to do with empty hand. If you could hit a tennis ball while it's moving in the air with a stick while you're moving at the same time, it's going to be a little bit easier to land those punches when your opponent's trying to move his head around. As far as control goes, control is really important when it comes to mastery of skill. So one drill that you can use with that is I'm going to take a bag, but really you can use a door frame, you can use a door, you can use anything that's static, that's stationary. And what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to step off at an angle, utilizing my footwork that we talked about earlier. I'm going to step off at a 45 and I'm going to throw an angle 1, but I'm going to try to stop my attack right before it hits the bag. So as I move, I'm going to try to stop that attack right before it makes that contact. Then I'm going to go back to my beginning spot and I'm going to step off at an opposite angle with an angle 2, doing the same thing. Now this is very basic and you can build it with any kind of strike that you want. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to move and strike. I'm trying to move and strike. And every time I'm trying to decrease this gap between my stationary object and my weapon to where I'm just barely making that contact. Once you build up this control, again, it's a lot easier to hit your opponent, whether it's with a punch or a kick, because it helps with that precision. So we've gone over footwork, we've gone over mechanics, and we've gone over precision and control. So now we're going to kind of put it together and go into movement and striking simultaneously. Now this is where the fun stuff starts happening, because when you're training in Filipino martial arts, you see a lot of videos of people just doing these static drills and all this kind of stuff. And this is only one very, very small part of how to become effective when it comes to training Filipino martial arts. The big part is the flow, is the fight, is putting it all together and making it live. Think about Jiu Jitsu for a second. How many times are you going to train just a really static armbar? Your partner's letting you lock it in every single time. You're working on the mechanics. You're working on the precision. You're working on the control. Starting to sound a little familiar? And then you go into a rolling type scenario. And once you get into that rolling type scenario, you find that this armbar is a lot harder to pull off. Well, it's the same thought process here. You work with your striking, you work with your footwork, you work with your mechanics and your control. And now it's time to take it live. But in order to prepare for this, you want to start working how to maneuver and strike at the same time. So I don't want to just stand here and not move around and just work on my striking all the time. As soon as I start getting a little bit of understanding with this, I want to start moving. So I'm going to go left 45 and I'm going to strike. I'm going to go right 45 and I'm going to strike. I'm going to utilize every footwork pattern that I can come up with. And again, referencing back to some of our other videos, check these out because we break it down for you. I want to be able to move and strike, whether I'm going forward or backwards, move and strike, move and strike. You can start off with very basic patterns, left 45, right 45, reverse, reverse. And then from there, you start putting it into more live to where you're just kind of flowing. And every time I step, I want to make sure that I'm throwing some kind of an attack, because what this does is it makes me a lot more versatile as a fighter. If I can move and I can strike, I can move to you and I can strike you. How does this carry over into MMA? Guys, this is obvious. I don't want to be a static target for my opponent, because what's going to happen is he's going to use me as a punching bag. And let's face it, nobody likes being used as a punching bag, so I need to move. I'm going to utilize those same type of footwork patterns, but as I'm moving, I'm going to strike. As I'm moving, I'm going to strike. If I have to go backwards, I'm going to strike. If I have to go forward, I'm going to strike. Now, depending on what it is that you're training and depending on what it is that you're trying to utilize, you can plug in any kind of strike that you want. You can use your elbows. You can use your punches. You can use your kicks. You can use your headbutts. Left way, guys. One of the things that you really want to do is once you start understanding these movement patterns and once you start building up these mechanics, put it into a movement type scenario, because the more that you can move and strike simultaneously, the more effective of a fighter, whether it's Filipino martial arts or MMA or kickboxing or whatever, the more effective you're going to be. Moving on to our next part, and probably my most favorite carryover from the Filipino martial arts into any type of competition fighting, and really just any kind of fighting, period, paragraph, end of sentence, is the ambidexterity that Filipino martial arts offers you. Now, think about this for a second. A lot of Filipino martial arts that you see a focus on just one weapon, whether it's a stick, a sword, a knife. But as you progress through most Filipino martial arts systems, and especially with pekiti-tirsia, you get into double weapons, double stick, double sword, double knife, and having the ability to not really have a bad side. And what I mean is, I'm right-handed. I fight southpaw. I like having this side out. However, because of my training in Filipino martial arts, it doesn't matter where I'm at in the fight, whether I have my right side forward, my left side forward. I have the ability, I have the skill to be able to utilize both sides 100%. And this is why. So when you're here and you're in Filipino martial arts, you're learning how to wield both hands, both weapons, whether I'm on my dominant side and I'm working with one hand, or whether I'm making a transition and I'm coming back in with that other hand. You learn how to use different types of weapons, and you also do so in a way to where you don't really have a dead side. You don't have a bad side. So how does this transfer over into competition fighting? Guys, it's obvious. If you have somebody who can only fight with one side, yet you can utilize both, that's going to make you a more effective fighter. You're going to be one up on your opponent. If you're in one side and he's starting to kind of figure you out and he's got a game plan based on a southpaw fighter or an orthodox fighter, and you switch it up on him, oh my goodness, he's not going to know what to do with himself. He's not going to know what to do with you. But yet you've been training Filipino martial arts, so you are just that much, if not more effective on both sides than he is on just one. It's a no-brainer. The more you train Filipino martial arts, the more that you're going to be better when it comes to kickboxing, when it comes to MMA, when it comes to any type of competitive fighting. So go out there, get you some sticks, and make yourself better.